She
Yeah, it started.
ah Hello everyone. This is the let's see, do we yeah, we do seem to have some participants. This is the Stepping Stones Planning Books and Series Writing webinar. I'm Heather O'Malley. I'm the moderator for this, but we'll probably also be joining in. And then we have, let's start with you, Elle, to say hello.
Sure. Hi, I'm Elle. I write sapphic science fiction romance and sapphic paranormal romance for DSP Publications. I have 9 books out, 6 of which are parts of series, and I'm represented by Naomi Davis at Bookends Literary.
Genevieve?
Nice. Hi, I'm Genevieve Clovis. I wrote Tea and the Transcendent, which is a novel in stories, supernatural fantasy. It is the first book in a planned series. I'm definitely a pantser. I'm also an editor who specializes in speculative fiction, so I help a lot of people who are writing series.
Okay, and Jessica just popped in. Once she unmutes herself, she can introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessica Lucci, and I'm best known as a steampunk author and poet. And I'm going to talk today about plotting and planning, especially in my series, the Watch City series.
Okay, and I my first book, speculative fiction, Hands the Morai, is the first book in a series. And again, I'm a, total pantster. I have the thinnest of outlines. I think it's like 3, 4 lines. But yeah, that's about me. So let's go around and let everyone know if you're a planner or a pantser.
Well, I am definitely a planner. Like, there's no doubt about it. I have wall charts, I have binders, I have boxes and boxes of colored sticky notes. I write outlines and then repeat revising the outlines as I go through. I am definitely a planner.
I am a plantser. I have a general idea of beginning, turning point, and end. I know my characters very, very, very well. I will usually loosely plan 3 chapters, write them, revise them, and then loosely plan the next 3 chapters, write them, revise them. So I'm a 3 steps forward, 2 steps back kind of writer, so that by the time the book is done, it's done, which is nice.
I'm a pantser. There's a little bit of planning. I have that very loose sense. Like Heather, I've got that very loose sense of where it's going, maybe. But I definitely don't do a ton of planning. I like to write majority of it first and then go back and do the outlining afterwards. And then I use that for the revision stage.
Okay. First question for our two, more planner than Genevieve and myself. How complete is your plotting? How in depth do you go?
Well, I go pretty in depth. As a matter of fact, when I was writing my trilogy, I didn't know it was going to be a trilogy at first, but by the time I had finished halfway through book 1, I knew it was going to be a trilogy. So I had these big poster boards gridded out with different sticky notes, one for each concept. And my office looked like a rainbow. And then I printed out my books and my notes to make sure that there was correlation between the 3 books that made sense. And I did a lot of research. I collect postcards, so I collected postcards based on my books. I have a map of my true city that I wrote and based on an actual city and not a fantasy city. I have a map of it, and I mapped out where different things were on the map. So, and my plot, my outlines do shift as I go along. Like, I'll, if I decide that there needs to be another scene in there or have some dialogue cut out, then I'll adjust my outline for that so I can go on for there. But without my outline, I am lost.
I think I'm gonna jump on Team Genevieve and Heather. There. Yeah, compared to Jessica, I am definitely a pantser. I might have a one sentence for each chapter. This is the thing that happens in this chapter kind of notes. I do know what my three major conflicts are, and I always have three. There's always the external one, there's the romance one, and then there's the main character's internal angst, whatever is bothering her at any given time, conflict. And that they all three have to kind of intertwine as the story goes on. But no, I do not have anything close to what Jessica does. Sounds a lot like my spouse. My spouse is a writer, and my spouse does extensive plotting, but that is definitely not me.
Well, you said you plot like you come up with 3 chapters at a time. That
Right.
does sound a lot more,
Yeah. I
plotty
mean,
than
it's
how I work.
it's still more of a, okay, these are the three major things that must happen within these 3 chapters. Now go. And hopefully the characters go along with me and do what I ask them to do within those 3 chapters. But no, it's nothing like what Jessica does.
Okay. This one, uh, Genevieve, and I'll answer it after you. Is how how well do you know where you're going in your when you start your story?
I usually know where I'm going to end. Like I have a pretty good sense of like an end point. I often write the ending fairly early on in the process, so I kind of know what I'm working towards. And then it's just kind of the middle that's a little bit all over the place. But because I don't have like strict planning, I think even if I did have strict planning, because sometimes I have tried to plan, everything is very free form, right? So I have a lot of, you know what, that's not working anymore, and I'm just going to toss it and write something new. So even if I know what I'm initially trying to write towards, that doesn't mean that that's what I actually end up writing towards, because sometimes I'm like, oh, that doesn't make sense anymore. And rather than rewriting all the stuff that has built up to that, I'll just rewrite the ending.
That makes sense. Like for me, in the last book I worked on, Hands of the Morai, I knew I wanted to have several different battle scenes. That constituted my planning. And I just had them on a sheet of paper saying I would like an ambush, I would like a small unit, I would like a larger unit fight. And I mean, then I was like, okay, let's see how I get there from here. I had no idea where it was going to end. And I had less of an idea of where it was going to start. But, and as I mentioned to Jessica yesterday at the book reading, uh, my initial start didn't go very far either. And then I had to throw out chunks of it and introduce a new character just to fill in a hole that I didn't know existed until I started. And then it took off. But yeah, it was very much, you know, I I think it's because I come to writing from a lot of improv theater and role-playing games where I run the games, where I if I tried to plot, the players just take off in their own direction, and then I have to just fake it till I make it, from then on. So with that background, it's very easy for me to just kind of discover where the story goes and braid in all the, the internal story, the external story, if I have a romance or not, or any other aspects of what's going on. That just seems part of the normal storytelling process to me, and it just comes out that way.
I think I'm a little similar because I do a lot of prompt writing. So I'll have like, sometimes I'll write something that was completely unexpected and then be like, I wonder if I can fit this in. And so things will change because of that. So I just do a lot of like, I also don't write in order at all. I just write whatever takes my fancy at the time and then try to rearrange it later to make it make sense and figure out what connective tissue is missing.
Okay, that makes sense.
I sometimes also don't write in order because I have my outline. I can kind of focus on what I want to focus on at that time and then go back and fit it in to be in order chronologically.
Oh, see, if I wrote out of order, I would be completely lost. I would have no idea what's going on.
The first book I ever wrote, I wrote out of order. And it worked, but then somehow I lost that ability, and now I have to write in chronological order. I don't know why.
Probably because, your stories you're telling now work that way.
Maybe.
Because I have found that sometimes, depending on the book, my process changes.
Definitely.
Yes.
Like when I worked on a young adult book, it was a lot more planned, and I had, story beats and all that. And I was like, okay, this is very odd for me. And yet no other story will do that, only that story. And I'm like, okay. So, lesson learned. Don't force a plan when, the plan doesn't want to be there.
I did plan one book. I did actually plan out everything that happened ahead of time, and it worked. I mean, it did sell, but I think I had to plan it because it was very outside my norm. It was a much lighter book. It was a murder mystery, but it was a much lighter book. And you went with a mystery, you kind of have to know like where you're going to drop those clues. The one thing I did not plan was who did it, so that was fun at the end, but we figured it out. So.
That's always fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who write murder mysteries have to write essentially backwards.
Mm-hmm.
Because, first you have to know who did it, and then work, and then figure out where the little, clues pop up and why. And I'm like, oh, note to self, don't write mystery.
I will never do it again. I will never do it again. It was interesting though when my writing group, God bless them, we sat and brainstormed for hours on how I was going to end this book. And the subconscious is an amazing thing because I had actually laid all the hints for who it was going to be. I just hadn't noticed them myself, which was kind of revelatory. I don't know if that's the right word, but it worked really, really well once we figured it out. I just had to enhance the things that I'd already put in place. So thank goodness for writing groups.
And yeah, revelatory is the right word. You were spot on.
Good.
Okay. So when you decide, you're going to write a series, do you, do you have like a rough idea of where the series is going before you start, or do you just kind of see where it's going to roll?
Well, for me, being such a plotter, I have to know some things that are going to happen because I can't stand it when I'm reading a series that's chronological with the same characters and the end of book one doesn't solve anything. Like I want the book to be able to not be necessarily a standalone, but I want the main issues to be resolved. Otherwise, I feel like it should have been included in another book. So I maintain some problems unsolved to carry on to books 2 and 3. And then my book 3 just kind of wrapped everything up, all the unanswered mysteries and questions. But yeah, I really need to have an idea of where the story is going to take me and when I'm going to reveal these shocking truths in my stories.
Okay. Yeah, for me, The Hands of the Morai being the first of a series, I know where the second book is going to end. I know there's going to be a third book. There might be a fourth book. I don't know. So, for me, it's much more. I know the next step, and then maybe this part of the step after, but it's, for me, it's a lot less formed. I just know, hey, this will be a series because I can't write the whole story in the first shot because it's too big. And my publisher only limits me to 100,000 words. And
That's
that's
impressive.
yeah, they can go up to 100,000. I usually sit around 90.
I
So,
usually around 50.
wow.
My books are
So,
much shorter.
okay, so Genevieve, Elle, what?
Yeah, I have. So I didn't know that it was going to be a series when I started it. I was just writing the one book and was content with it just being the one book. But then, of course, you get all these ideas, and it was like, "Ooh, that would be really good." But I can't fit that in this one. That's way too much going on. So I kind of like, I'm just going to save that for maybe that'll be later. And then, yeah, I had 2 other ideas, and actually 2 other book titles that I was like, "Ooh, those are good titles. That's a perfect trilogy right there." And all those titles work really nicely together. So I kind of put a pin in those ideas and earmark them for each of the titles. I'm working on the sequel now, and I have completely changed what those ideas were or when they're being delivered, but they're still kind of the essence of them is still in there. Yeah, so for me, I just have a very rough idea. I will say when I'm working with my clients, it does depend, but sometimes I have to be like, okay, I think you need to do some outlining. I know you prefer to just kind of pants it or whatever, but some of them are like these giant epic fantasy books that it's, you're dropping threads. So what about this thing that you mentioned in book 1 and now we're on book 4 and it's never been mentioned again? So sometimes I have to prod my clients to do a bit more plotting. And that is in my mind that also probably means sometimes I need to do a bit more plotting.
For me, I have 2 trilogies, either of which could go on further if the publisher wants more of them. I generally think in terms of sets of 3. So, I mean, I have my Stormfront series, which is a set of 3, but it was originally conceived to be 3 sets of 3, which I would love to do at some point. I have my Nearly Departed trilogy, which is more, here's this adventure, and now they've finished this adventure, and here's the next adventure coming along. But the individual books, especially book 1, could definitely all stand by themselves. Book 2 tends to leave a few more things hanging to lead into book 3, and book 3 definitely will close off the overarching whatever is going on. But the only thing I really know when I sit down to start is the main character's emotional arc. Who is she when this thing begins, and what kind of a person do I want her to grow into by the end of 3 books? That I can usually see really clearly. The individual adventures come a little later. The romance kind of builds over time, but the main character, I know her, I know where she comes from, and I know where I want her to grow. So that's what I've got when I get started.
Okay, we have a question from MB Austin. what is the longest series each of you has written? And says, I know Elle has several trilogies. So is that still?
That is it. Yeah, I have two trilogies. I have people that have been asking for a sequel to the most recent release, but it wasn't planned to be a series. But I've had enough demanding people that it might have to get a sequel at some point. Um, like I said, I would love to write more in the two trilogies I have. At the moment, that's not the direction that my publisher wants me to go. So I'm currently working on a new trilogy that I'm shopping around at this time.
Genevieve, Jessica?
Yeah, I've just written the one. I've only published the first book. It is a loosely planned trilogy, but I also have the prequel. There's a prequel story that's actually already written, and a companion book that is like half written. I got distracted. So that's the only one that I've written. I have another fantasy series that I started years ago, and then it kind of got like swept to the side, and I forgot about it until very recently, where I've been like, oh, I should look at that again. But I'm actively resisting looking at it because I don't want to distract myself from the one I'm currently working on.
Well, I have one trilogy, the Watch City series, and from that I wrote an offshoot of it, which is a novella. So it's not a full-length novel, but I felt like I missed my characters, and I had my readers asking me for more from the characters. So when I really had this idea that I wanted to work on, and it came out to be a fun novella with some of the same characters from the trilogy, but a different timeline. So if you knew the characters from the trilogy, it was fun to see them in a different timeline through time travel. But if you didn't know the characters, it has still gained a following just in its own self.
Excellent. For me, I have, in terms of publication, I have the one trilogy that's planned, and we'll see how that goes because apparently sales determine a great deal of that. So I have a trilogy planned, but before I got picked up, I was part of a writing group, and I had written a series that was over 1,500,000 words.
Wow, that's
Uh,
impressive.
and we had to weave plots together from 10 different writers. And we had a writing Bible, but not really any coherent plot. We're like, okay, it's a superhero series set at a school for superheroes. What and villains. So you get both of them at the same school. How exciting. It's terrible for everyone. And this is the Watley Academy series if anyone wants to hunt it down online. There's a whole bunch of new writers doing stuff now, and I'm just like, wow. But I still occasionally pop up and throw in a new story with my characters. So it just keeps getting bigger, that series. But yeah, there was a lot of while the individual writers pretty much seem to pants it, and so you get some really interesting directions. I actually was trying to weave in threads of their stories into mine to kind of bring all everything together. And that required a bit more plotting than usual, but that would constitute as the biggest thing I've done ever, which is what MB Austin was asking. Okay, let's go to uh, okay, so for people who plot and even some of the pantsers, do you have your ideas and at least drafting or have gotten the writing to your series, get it done, before you try and publish the first book? Or is it just charge forth?
So you're saying, do we have the entire series written before we try to publish? Is that what you're
Or
asking?
at least drafted, or at least ideas together for it?
Got it. So for me, it was a really weird journey along the road. I sold, I had written about 7 books. I sold one, my publisher went under, got the rights back. Then I sold the first book in my first series, and the next 2 in the same series on proposal. So they were not written. I sold the first one and they wanted 2 more and they were not written yet. And I had about 4 months each to write them, which was fine. Honestly, it was fine because I knew because that was, it was a set and I knew where that was going. I just had to put hands to keyboard and I did. We did it. It was fine. And then because they liked that series, they went and bought my other series, and my other series was written. And because I'm not going to sit around and wait for somebody to finally buy my book. So I like, okay, I'll write something else in the meantime. So lucky for me, I already had that trilogy completely written. And so when they bought all 3, I could just turn them in very quickly. But normally I wouldn't. Normally I would only write the first book, because if you can't sell the first book, then writing 2 and 3 is just a waste of your time if you're going the traditional route, because no one's going to buy book 2 if it's a coherent set. So
I feel like if you're going traditional publishing versus self-publishing, it has a big impact on this decision, because like Elle just mentioned, why would you write the whole thing if you haven't sold book 1 to a traditional publisher? If you're self-publishing, you have to do all of that on your own. So you can write the whole thing and then go for it and focus all your attention on marketing or however you want to do it. I did self-publish, and I did just write the first one and was like, okay, well, that's done. And part of it was just, I didn't know if I would continue or not. And like publishing was never really my goal. I just really enjoyed writing it, and then it was done. And to get myself to stop working on it, I needed to like put it out. And part of it is because I work with indie authors, so I wanted to go through that process so I'd have a better insight of how you receive that editorial feedback and what that whole process is like. I a little bit regret publishing the first one before I'd written the other ones, because I don't have that extensive planning and I don't have all those notes that Jessica has. And now there's sort of this urge to like, oh, I wish I'd put this thing in so that I could, better foreshadow this thing that I didn't know was going to happen when I wrote the first one. So yeah, in hindsight, I kind of wish that I'd held on to it and maybe not completed, but at least had strong drafts for the next couple of stories.
Well, as you know, I'm very much a plotter. So so halfway through book 1, I knew I was going to do at least 2, and then I realized I was going to do 3. So I did have my 3 boards of colorful paper, but and even for my novella, I had a board. It wasn't just filled up. I originally thought it was going to be a novel, but I decided to make it more concise, to make it a faster read for people who might just be introducing themselves to my writing. But I think for me, it's important to plot like that because I like to see what's going to happen so I can build up to it. Otherwise, I'm just going to miss it completely.
Okay. Yeah, for me, I it depends on the story. I mean, yeah, with my Hands of the Morai book, since it is traditionally published, I have to wait for the, publisher to say, yeah, we could go with book two because the sales were enough that it justifies that, in which case I'll be like, great. And then I have to give them the rough plot of the story. And I at least have, in my research notes and stuff like that, ideas of, rough ideas of things I want to happen. So I researched, fires in medieval cities and how did people fight floods in the Middle Ages, or did they just accept it and, work from there? And so I got these different things I'm working on, uh, at least notes wise, because I'm like, oh, maybe this will be part of the story. Or maybe I'll get there and all of a sudden it'll be like, oh, all this research on medieval floods, practices, completely useless. You know, but that's okay. I learned something interesting. Uh,
I will say that traditional publishing does kind of force you to be a bit more of a plotter. It's, because if you haven't written books two and three, but you want to sell them books two and three, they're going to ask you for some sort of outline for where you see this series going. And then, oh, darn it, now I've got to actually have one. So yeah, that has forced me to get in line a little bit more with the plotting side of it.
I want to ask you a question, everybody here a question about, since you all seem to be traditionally published.
I'm not.
And,
I'm
yourself? Okay. So for the traditionally published people then, when you write a book and you've sold it, and then you've got to wait to see if those sales are enough to continue the series, do you switch to a different series? Do you not feel like that first one is incomplete, and how can you just leave it?
So for me, I mean, I wrote the three for the Nearly Departed simply because I was having just so darn much fun, but none of them had sold yet. That was when I did break my own rule of waiting until selling book one before writing books two and three, because the words were coming. And I know myself, and I know that when the words are coming, you do not stop the words from coming, because then they won't come back for a while. So I did go ahead and write all three of those. And fortunately for me, after several years, yes, I was able to sell the whole series together. The other ones I did not, but that's actually when I started writing the second series that I completed. So yes, I wrote the first book, then went off and wrote the first book in the next series, loved doing it, kept going, and then wrote about two or three standalones. And I figured, well, if one of these darn things will sell, maybe they'll want the rest, which is what happened. But I was very fortunate in that.
for me, I'm working on a completely different book from the hands of the Morai right now that is pretty radically different. And but meanwhile, I have, the Morai series itching under my skin, kind of going, hey, what about us? I'm like, we'll get to you. And they're like, oh, yeah, really? When are you going to get to us? I'm like, I don't know. Stop it. It's like having a cat,
Mm.
and the cat wants your attention. And so the cat will sit quietly and not do anything. And then it'll come up and go, hi, claw. And you're like, nah, you know, but it's never forgotten. It's always there sitting in your head. And it's frustrating, but I get it from a business point of view. It's just that, I would love to just crank out that series and then work on something different from there. But they were like, no, we want this story. And I'm like, okay, well, then let me write this story that I
Right.
have the vaguest of outlines in my head for.
Right.
I mean, it's like, you're going to pay me money. So, okay, I will write the thing that you want to pay me money for. And I hope my creative brain will go with that. But yeah, the characters wake me up at night. The ones that want more story. Yeah, all the time.
All the time. Yeah.
That's what I suspected. I don't know if I would be able to resist.
Oh, there's no peace. There's no peace.
No.
Even when they're going and the story's just going and I'm on to the next book and the next book, they're still going, someone else from some other story is going, "Hey, what about us?" And I'm like, "Ugh, okay." I'm like, "Not even remotely there. The publisher was not even interested in you." They're like, "We don't care." So it's like having a whole house full of cats, just constantly different cats are trying to get your attention while you're trying to do this thing. And maybe I'm grooming this cat so it can go out and find a permanent home. Could the rest of you just stop? And they're like, "That's adorable. You think that's going to work?"
Throw it some treats. Throw it some treats. Write a
I
scene,
tr-
and
I
then it'll
try.
go be entertained for a while.
Okay, to the audience, do you have any other questions? Or should I just start making some up out of my head?
I think one just dropped into the chat.
Let's see. Okay, Angie asked, I came in late, so this may have already been asked. Do you feel obligated to write a series rather than a single book, standalone, especially if it's fantasy?
I don't. I mean, I am writing a series, but it was originally just the one story, and I was like perfectly happy with that. It's just that, like you said, the cats, the ideas kept coming, so I kept going. But definitely, it's because it still has my attention. That's why I'm still working on it, and I could just as easily, if I didn't have those ideas for the next couple books, and if I didn't love those characters so much, I could just be like, well, you're done. You're just one book now.
It's interesting the trends that seem to shift back and forth in traditional publishing, because for a while it was they wanted every book to have series potential, so that and that was the catchphrase, right? Make sure you write that in your query, make sure that goes into the publisher pitch, is this is a standalone with series potential, because a lot of things were being bought in twos and threes. Now it seems to have shifted to, we really want a standalone book. And I guess if it really takes off, then they will ask for another book along the same lines. So it really has to be a by itself story and not leave anything hanging. Or it may have shifted back again, but that's what I've been hearing for the last few months coming down the pipe. So
Well, I'm working on a novel that's different than what I usually write. I usually write steampunk fantasy, and the one I'm working on now is historical fiction, and it's definitely going to be one book. It's about a particular person in history who I've kind of turned into a lesbian, where there was rumors she was a lesbian and during her time, but I definitely made her one in this book. But it's going to tell her story, and there's going to be no future in it. It's going to be the whole thing completed. And I'm hoping that my readers, and I've asked my readers if they would actually read it, seeing as it's not what I typically write. And I've had good response back. But it's a risk to write a standalone when you've written a series, and it's might not be as profitable, because once somebody gets their hold on book one of your series, or book two or book three, whatever, they are intrigued to read more of the series. Where if you have a standalone, they might be just like, that's it. Is there more than to it? I'm not really interested in the series. So it's a risk.
Yeah, for me, it very much varies story by story. I mean, when I started Hands of the Morai, I was not aware that it had the potential to be a three or more book series. I just was like gonna write this story just to get the idea out of my head and have some fun, because I'd been working on the same couple of stories, refining them to send them out, to publishing houses, trying to get, hey, could you pick up my book, please? And so I just wanted something fun, and I was writing something fun, and then it became something more, and I was like, okay, that was not expected. And, I think it's because the Raven in the story wanted more screen time.
I just love that character so much.
Oh, Nibs is actually just demented.
Those are the best kind of characters.
Oh yeah. Well, we've talked about feeling, you know, the urge to keep going. Is it usually does the plot drive you, or do the characters drive you to keep going?
Character for me, always, always, always. Um, my story ideas come to me in dreams, and the main character will incessantly talk to me until I give her what she feels she deserves. I know that makes me sound really out there, but I think many authors can relate. It's just I can hear her. I can hear her voice. I know what she says. I know how she sounds. I know what she wants. And until she gets what she wants, that story is not going away. Very much like the cats that you were talking about. And when you write assassin characters and mercenary soldier characters, it's a little scary when they're yelling at you to write their story. So yeah, they're not quiet. But it's always character. Character drives me. I need to get her out of the bad emotional, psychological place she's in into a place where she is happier before she will be quiet.
Genevieve, I saw you nodding along.
Yeah, I'm the same. For me, it's the characters that interest me, and a lot of my process is just like, imagine this character in this scenario. That's hilarious. I need to write that. And then now I need to like create a plot around that because I found it hilarious. So yeah, definitely characters for me.
For me,
Jessica?
it's a mix of characters and plot. Like when I was writing book one of the series, I had a main character, and a lot of the readers didn't respond well to her because she's very snobby and does not relate to people well. But in the meantime, I had the idea for book two, and I realized I needed a younger, different character to be the main character. And this particular character in the first book she started growing and becoming this entity that deserved her own book. And so she became the lead character, the main character in book two and in book three. So so it was a bit of both for me. Like I knew I wanted this action to happen. I knew I wanted the plot to go this way, but I needed to put the correct character into it. And it was so fun to put her through all this pain and watch her grow. Like I feel so bad for her now, but she's come through it.
Yeah, for me, it's also a bit of both, because sometimes the story is like it's moving, and so you're like, okay, it's still continuing. I need to take it to where it's gonna go, and this was a natural stopping place for book one, so the story needs to go to a second book. And like for the second book, I know the ending of that story because I was like, I want the big exciting scene to come down to something I've never seen before. And I thought that would be interesting. Let's have the great moment not be a battle between two people, but between a person versus an element, and dealing with, either a flood or a fire, and because those are huge, those are impersonal. So seeing a person go and sort of battle against nature, I thought that would be cool. And so that plot element, and how my character would deal with it drove me to go, okay, I have a second book. I don't know where it's going to end, but I have a second book. And I'm like, great. You know, now and they were like, oh, well, let's wait till we see the sales numbers. And I'm like, because I wanted to get, to just go right into the next book because I'm like, oh, that's going to be so interesting is seeing this person challenging the elements and how would you do that? And it's in a medievalish setting, and so that complicates things as well. So yeah, but also I have just the most annoying raven in the world just chattering in my ear saying, "Hey, what am I'm supposed to, get some other stuff going on. When's that happening with me?" And I'm like, "Calm down." It's like, "No, no."
I love that.
Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left. Any last minute thoughts on planning books, series, anything like that?
Maybe about what's coming out next. Or
Maybe
coming
about what's coming up next. Yeah, that's a good. That's all part of the whole thing. Let's go.
So we're currently shopping the first book in what we're tentatively titling the Bar Butch series. And it is designed around locations rather than characters. That way, if the first one doesn't sell, the second one could, and the third one could, and it won't affect the situation. They are centered around lesbian characters in different kinds of bars. So the first one is set in a speakeasy. The second one I am working on is set in an axe throwing bar. And the third one will be set in a karaoke bar. So that
Oh,
they're all different.
fun.
It's fun. It is fun, and it is all different pairings. So I can actually shop them individually should the speakeasy one not take off. But that's what I'm currently working on at this time.
Okay, Genevieve.
I'm just working on a sequel for my first book, Tea and the Transcendent. I'm doing a similar novel and story style. So it's right now I'm in the very early stages, which is what I call the chaos state. So it's a lot of just like I'm writing random things, and later on I'm going to figure out how they all fit together.
Okay, Jessica.
I'm working on a standalone right now, and it's tentatively titled Triangle House, and it's about two women in the Industrial Revolution in a made-up world of Chicago, and they are trying to create a commune for women and children to be safe and to be educated. And they're definitely lesbians. They're in love with each other, but then there's a love triangle from their maid, and then there's this awful guy who just is a misogynist, and and there's a Jack the Ripper trope in there. And it's but I'm overwhelmed with it right now because I got notes back from my editor, and it's just, I understand. I love criticism, whether it's, I don't care how constructive it is. I love criticism. And so I'm going through all the notes and I'm like, this has to be tabled for a minute. So in November for NaNoWriMo, I'm dedicating myself to this book, and I'm going to completely finish it by the end of November.
I'm working on a story called Message Forward, where the basic concept is imagine your friend hands you a book and you're one of the characters in it.
Whoa.
Ooh, cool.
And so it's dealing with that. And the book was written and published in 1962.
Awesome.
So that's taking me all sorts of really interesting places. So hopefully that'll be coming out next year or the year after. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks to the audience who came and stayed with us through this. And hope you guys are enjoying Rainbow Space Magic 4.
And I'm just so
For
impressed with
moderating.
you pantsers. I'm so impressed. Just gotta say that.
No, we
Okay.
write ourselves into corners all the time. So
All the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Thank you all
getting
so
out of the corner.
Yes.
We're the exact opposite of don't put baby in the corner.
yeah. This was fun, guys.
Mhm.
All right, thank
Take
you.
care. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.